So let's talk about the Kentucky Oaks. It's run on Friday. It's the 11th race, and it's run at a mile and an eighth for 3-year-old fillies. And for those of you who have watched the prior presentations for the Derby, for the elements of handicapping, this will be a slightly truncated version because of time constraints, unfortunately. So we'll take a look, and here's the field. And you can see, taking a look at it, that it's a pretty top-heavy field. It's kind of an all or nothing. You've got your chalky horses, most notably Tarfa, Ways and Means, Just FYI, Lesleys Rose, and thorpedoanna, and then after that, it drops off fairly significantly. So it's fairly similar to the Derby in content. There's a big drop off. So prices will be a little hard to come by, I think, in this race, but I do think there is some value to be had. So we'll start with form, and the 4 elements, for those of you unfamiliar, that we look at are form, class, speed, and pace. And those are the 4 corners of handicapping, and we'll do that for all the contenders. And what we try to do is quantify each of those elements and come up with a raw score compared to the average for each. So we start with form. Now what we do is we use a +2, -2 system. And basically, as you can see, 0 would be average, which means you're kind of middle of the road. You're just an average, you're in average form coming into the Oaks. Obviously, above average, you get a +1. Outstanding form, you get a +2. And then, of course, below average is -1, and then just plain awful is a -2. So those are we consider those for each prep race the contenders have run. Now, some of them have only run one race. Some of them have run multiple, 1 or 2. So their form score will reflect that. So if you see a number that's a little bigger, it means that they've probably run in more than one race. So we take a look at the field, and what I've done is these are the scores that we've arrived at. And basically, form is what we're talking about, is how they ran, in particular in their last race, but also the Oaks preps in general. And so, as you can see, I've highlighted the better scores in blue and the worst ones in red. So you see, it may surprise a couple of you that Fiona's Magic, after that really awful Gulfstream Parks Oaks, isn't lower. But the reason being is that she did have a pretty good devonadale. So she got positive numbers for that. I believe I gave her a +1. And obviously she gets a -2 for the Gulfstream Park Oaks. Well, actually, no, she got a 0 for the devonadale because it was a 1-turn mile, and I didn't think it was that great a race. The big loser is Into Champagne because she ran in both the Gulfstream Park Oaks as well as the devonadale, and I didn't think she was particularly good in either of them, and so consequently she gets a -4. Now, if you look at Ways and Means, one of the other elements I should mention is that I add into these always is more of a subjective kind of score, and it has to do with progression, and where I think that they maybe ran well and can run better. So we'll give them maybe with the same -2 to +2 type of range. So horses like Ways and Means, given the troubled trip and the debut at 3, gets a +2 because I thought, despite all the trouble, I thought she ran a very good race, and certainly based upon that is capable of better second off the layoff. And so we give her an extra point for that. Just FYI, kind of the same thing, gets a +1 because she's capable of better. We know this. Won the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Filly, so we try to augment it a little bit. Now you look at Our Pretty Woman. I thought her progression is really excellent, and I think if she can draw into this race, is sitting on a big race. So we give her a +2 on top of the +2 that she ran in the Fairgrounds Oaks, because I thought she ran an excellent race and I think is capable of better. So that's how we do it. So when you see a number that's higher or lower than ± -2, that's the reason, and I hope that is clear. We did do that for the also eligibles, Our Pretty Woman and Candid as well. So given the scores from form, obviously the horses we like the best, Our Pretty Woman, I think if she draws in, I'm really excited. I think she's got an excellent progression, and given the race shape potentially, I think she has a really good potential to run a big race. Just FYI in Ways and Means, as well as Tarifa. Tarifa's been consistently good. Hers results from two races, the Rachel Alexandra and the Fairgrounds Oaks. She got a +1 for the Rachel Alexandra, but I believe a +2 for the Fairgrounds Oaks. So obviously the horses with the positive values are in good form, and the ones with the negatives are regressing, and we can't expect too much. Now, I'll mention one, maybe this clarifies it a little bit. If you look at Lemon Muffin, for instance, now her Fantasy Stakes was a pretty bad race, I thought. She gets a -2 for that, but she got a 0 for the Honeybee, because I didn't really think the field was very good. When you consider that you had I think she was like 27, 28 to 1, and second place was Tapa Janali at 25 to 1, something like that. So I didn't think the quality of the field was terribly good. So even though she did win it, breaking her maiden, she gets a 0 for that, because I didn't think it was an outstanding effort when you compare it to the field. So that's what form looks like. Now, what we're going to do is we will have scores for each element, obviously, form, class, speed, and pace, and we will delineate how we arrive at those numbers. But you can see right now the horses in blue, they're the ones that we're pretty positive about, and then the ones in red, not so hot. And, of course, 0 is pretty about average. So the next element we look at is class, and these are the elements that we look at: pedigree, prep race value. We're going to grade all the prep races to arrive at a +2 through -2 for them. Then their form, how they ran in each of the races, and then the potential for progression. Those are all +2, -2 values. So the number will be skewed. Obviously, the better race you run in, the higher your class score should be. Now, I will make a note about pedigree. I don't believe it is nearly as important for the Oaks as it is for the Derby, because obviously it's a 1.125 and there's a lot of horses who can run big, even though maybe they have like a miler type of pedigree. I think they can still probably get the 1.125 under the right circumstances. So just to note, pedigree doesn't get a really big emphasis as opposed to the Derby. So based upon those, our rating system, +2 through -2, these are the ratings for the Kentucky Oaks prep races. And obviously the Ashland, I consider to be, it was the best field and it was the best race. So it gets a +2, and you go down all the way through. And the Devonadale, being a one-turn mile, I thought it was a rather average race, and I could even go so far as to maybe give it a -1. And the Bourbonette, just the field was really weak, and it was on synthetic at Turfway. Being just on synthetic would not give it necessarily a negative rating. 2 fills last year, running in the Jeff Ruby, I would have given that probably like a +1, because he was so outstanding in it. So it's not necessarily that it's on synthetic. So I do want to clarify that. So to me, the best races I thought were the Ashland, the Gulfstream Park Oaks, and the Fairgrounds Oaks. So those, and the Fantasy Stakes. Those were the 4 that I would consider to be the best. And the Gazelle, Rachel Alexandra, Honeybee, and Bourbonnette would be the worst, and Devonadale right in the middle. And again, that could probably go a little more towards a -1. So if we look at our class ratings, again, the ones that are negative are in red, and it shouldn't be any surprise. Fiona's Magic just ran such a terrible Gulfstream Park Oaks that she is going to get the lowest score of all. That was a really poor effort. It was in an okay race, a pretty good race, but she ran very poorly, and I don't think she has a very good progression in store. So you couple all those things together and ends up with a -7. Jing Jen, I didn't think was very good in the Gazelle. That was a distant third, pretty non-factor third, and I don't anticipate that Jing Jen is going to be moving forward. So hence you get a -2 for the race, you get a -4 for all the other the race performance, and you end up with a -4. Conversely, Tarifa ran 2 solid races in a row, and I do think has potential to move forward. So she gets a +1 for the Rachel Alexandra, a +2 for the Fairgrounds Oaks, and then she gets just one more for potentially moving forward progression-wise for a +4. Then obviously Our Pretty Woman, again, I hope this horse can draw in somehow because I'm really excited about her prospects, and she gets a +2 for moving forward, and then a +2 for the race, and a +1 for I believe for pedigree. And then Just FYI, again, I think is a horse who ran very well off the bench, and second off the layoff, Bill Mott, Big Stakes Day, has the potential to run another big race. So the 2 top ones would be Just FYI and Our Pretty Woman, and Tarifa right behind with a +4. And then, you have your average, and then horses who ran pretty well. I'll tell you, thorpedoanna, really the issue for me, just in case anyone's wondering, is she did run big in the fantasy stakes. That's true, but that field really wasn't very much. And so that's kind of why she gets a +1. I mean, she probably got a +2 for the effort, but then we have to downgrade it because the field wasn't very good, and that's how she ends up with a +1. And I'm not so certain that she is going to move forward from that race. Again, Kenny McPeak being extremely unpredictable with his horses. They run big one day, they don't run so great the next, and this is a pretty big step up in class. So I'm just not overly certain that thorpedoanna is going to run big in the Oaks. So that's consequently she gets a +1. So and then maybe note a horse like Everland. Everland, it ran on synthetic and is moving to dirt. That's a really big angle, and I think this horse is in good form, and so gets a +2. Where the race, wasn't the greatest, but I think this horse can run better. And if you're looking for prices, I think this horse can outrun her odds. Not expecting a winning type of effort, but I think this is one that can factor underneath in the gimmick. So she gets a +2. So again, I would have liked to have gone into more detail to show you the machinations of how we arrive at these numbers, but I'm sorry, I just wasn't able to. But those of you who watched the other presentations we did for the Derby, this should make sense. So that's what class looks like at this time. So now we'll look at speed, and obviously this is a really important criterion for the elements of handicapping, one we're most interested in. This one, we're going to use 4 different aspects, and what we do is we come up with an average for Beyer speed figure, Brisnet speed figure, the Thorograph, and then we have our subjective plus or minus 2, -2, -1, 0, +1, +2 for progression. So we try to augment a little bit. So if the figure was a little light in comparison by average, we can add in a little bit to sort of indicate that this horse is ready to make a move forward and will perhaps run a better figure. But these will be, the calculations are plus or minus the average. So we take an average for, let's say, the Beyer speed figure, and then we take a look at the last prep race for each contender and add or subtract from the average number, and that's how we arrive at it. We do that for each. So I hope that's clear as well. So these are the speed pars. The Beyer speed average was 85.29. The Brisnet speed figure average was 90.10. The Thorograph number was 8.17. And I do want to note, I threw out Fiona's Magic's score in the Gulfstream Park Oaks because it was just dreadful and it would really screw up. It wouldn't give us an accurate average, so I just tossed it. And then we have our progression again, as I mentioned, plus or minus 2. The scale is from +2 to -2, and then we add in accordingly. So here are the numbers, and again, in red would indicate the lower Beyer numbers, the lower Brisnet, and the higher Thorograph, because as we know with Thorograph, the lower the number, the better. So I hope that's clear. The blue would be the best. So if you look at Beyers, you'll see Tarfa, Lesleys Rose, and Our Pretty Woman have run the highest Beyer speed figures. If you look at Brisnet, the lows were Tapa Janali, Lemon Muffin, Fiona's Magic, and then the highs were Where's My Ring, Regulatory Risk, and Lesleys Rose. And then for the Thorograph, the higher numbers, again, are the worst numbers. So the red are Jing Jen, Lemon Muffin, Fiona's Magic, and Into Champagne. The blue numbers are obviously the better ones, and you see they're pretty similar, all of them. Thorpedoanna, Ways and Means, Just FYI, and Lesleys Rose. Now, those pluses and minuses are for the Thorograph indicate where there's a pattern of plus would be that it indicates they're probably going to take a move forward, and the minus indicates they're probably not going to move forward. And so I hope that's clear. If you don't see a plus and minus, then they just sort of probably are going to just run their race as they have consistently throughout. You will note I don't have a Thorograph number for regulatory risk, and I apologize I wasn't able to get to it. So we have to leave that blank, and we will note that regulatory risk numbers are skewed a little bit because we didn't have the Thorograph to consider. So in our calculations, these are the numbers we came up with. And again, that's taking the average of each of those three numbers, Beyer speed, Brisnet, and Thorograph, and then adding or subtracting from the score, the speed figure for each that each contender got in their last race. And from that, you can see, obviously, Fiona's Magic had a terrible race in the Gulfstream Park Oaks. And while it's probably not quite reflective of how she can run, it's a pretty bad number. It's a minus 130, 171. So you can see why we left it out of the averages to get a more accurate number. Lemon Muffins was the next worst, and then Tapa Janali, Into Champagne, and Jing Jen. The better ones were, the highest was Lesleys Rose, run in the Ashland, which was the best race, and she got the best speed number overall on the averages. And the next would be Power Squeeze, Ways and Means, and then Where's My Ring. So those are their speed numbers based upon their last race, how they compare to the averages for Beyer speed, Brisnet, and Thorograph. And I apologize if I'm being redundant, but I really want to make sure we understand this. And then we did factor in horses who potentially will progress or regress. They got a +2 or -2 within that range. So that's how we come up with those numbers. And that's an accurate indication of speed, I think. Came out just about the way I expected. So now we come to pace. Now, we have four factors for pace. We have the final fraction, and when you see the pace numbers, 1FR, 2FR, and 3FR are the first pace call, the second pace call, and the final time. So that would be at the half-mile point, the three-quarter, and then the final. And what we do is take the average for the final fraction amongst all the contenders, throwing out Fiona's Magic again in order to get a more accurate number. Then we're going to take, there are two significant pace calculations to make: the average pace and the sustained pace. And you'll see this when we get to the next page. But to explain, the average, or the sustained pace rather, is the second and third pace calls averaged out in feet per second. So when you see those numbers, it's feet per second averaged for the second and third call to tell you how this horse is progressing as the race goes on. The average pace is taking the sustained pace and adding it to the second pace call, or as you see on the next page will be EP. So you take the EP, add it to the SP, average them out, and that gives you the average pace. And that basically tells you how the horse is running throughout the entire race. So again, I hope that's clear. And again, if you watch the Derby presentations, I think it'll make sense. Then we have our more subjective number, and this one indicates where a horse perhaps has had a pattern of improvement that would give them a positive +1 or 2, a 0 if they're running about the same as they always do, and then a -1 or a -2 where they're headed in the wrong direction with their pace numbers. So these are the pars for the pace pars. So the final fraction averaged out at 52 feet per second. The average pace was 53.63 feet per second, and the sustained pace was 53.14 feet per second. So now you see you have the numbers for the first, second, and third call, 1FR, 2FR, 3FR, and from those numbers, the EP is the second call, or the 6 furlong mark for all these route races. And then we have the AP and the SP gleaned from the numbers to the left, the 1FR, 2FR, and 3FR. You see in blue the better third fractions. Now, if you're talking about the Kentucky Derby, anything over 53 would be considered excellent. At a mile and an eighth, a little easier to achieve. So it's not, if you ran you see thorpedoanna at a 52.88, that's still pretty good. Even a 52.38 for Jing Jen isn't bad, or Lesleys Rose. But obviously, the higher your third fraction, the better finish you're probably going to have. And you can see from the third fractions, Tarfa has the highest. And you look at her race shape, and she pretty much ran about one paced all the way around the track. And, visually, if you look at her, that's kind of the way it looks. Like she just kind of keeps along at a very high cruising speed. I mean, those are very good fractions. And then we have Everland. Now, you'll note the K-Rit by all those numbers because that's taken from synthetic. And as we know, the third fraction tends to be faster in synthetic because they don't run as quickly on the front end. So her Everland's fractions are very similar to that of Tarfa's, but it makes sense considering that they were on synthetic. And obviously the speed figures would be rather different. And I think that's, when you compare the two, you're not going to say that Everland runs as fast as Tarfa does. So that's where the speed figure score comes into play. You see the red ones, Fiona's Magic, obviously that Gulfstream Park Oaks was pretty dreadful. And Into Champagne wasn't terribly good, was backing up late as well. You also see Our Pretty Woman, and why I'm excited about her is look at that final fraction, and she was doing all the running on the front end. She ran a 55 for the first fraction and was able to keep on with, although decelerating, which is completely understandable for horses who run on the front end. That's logical. Horses, the horse who wins a race usually isn't the one who's running the fastest, who's decelerating the slowest. And so I hope that makes sense as well. So the blue numbers are the ones that had the best fractions. You see Where's My Ring ran a very good race in the Gazelle and was pretty consistent. One thing I will note is there's a fair amount of sameness to these fractions. You can throw out the bottom two, and they don't diverge terribly much. But you can see that the ones that are, the ones that have the better fractions are maybe a foot per second faster. So that's something to consider. Now, if you look over at our EP, AP, and SP, there's a reason Lesleys Rose is highlighted. And it is because for the Kentucky Derby, any horse who has the highest average pace and sustained pace usually wins the Derby. It's a very telling statistic. Now, Lesleys Rose leads in both here, but we also have to augment that by noting that the inside there was a fair amount of bias towards the inside, and she did have things work in her favor to a degree. So it is an accurate number, but you also have to qualify it with the way the race was run. So it may not be quite as indicative as it perhaps would be on other occasions for that reason. So I hope that's clear as well. So we take a look at our pace scores, and again, we take all the averages, adding and subtracting, and then we add in our progression subjective number, and we find that it's pretty, nobody is over and above the pack. Even with Lesleys Rose leading both, she still doesn't have the highest pace score. Tarifa does. So something to keep in mind, and again, that has to do with perhaps we don't give Lesleys Rose a +2 because of the bias associated with it. So that qualifies it, and that would put Tarifa up ahead. You also note, of course, Everland's is based on synthetic surfaces. So to me, if I'm looking at these numbers, our Pretty Woman's one really sticks out because she was running on the front end, and that may give you an idea why I was pretty excited about her. You look at the red numbers, Tapa Janali, Lemon Muffin. I did not like that Fantasy Stakes. I just didn't like it. Didn't think it was a great race. And you can see with even thorpedoanna, who won that race pretty convincingly, the pace score is only 1.04, just a hair above average. So that maybe gives us an indication. And of course, Fiona's Magic, was just an awful race, and so the number's going to be skewed and much, much higher than, or lower rather, than the rest. And Into Champagne was backing up in that race as well. So again, I hope these numbers make sense as a means of comparing each contender in terms of pace. So we'll start taking a look at the horses individually, and we'll start with on the rail, Tapa Janali, who's 30-1, and comes from the Arkansas, from the Oaklawn Oaks Trail, and ran in the Honeybee and the Fantasy Stakes, neither of which I thought was a terribly good race. In particular, the Honeybee was really left something to be desired. You can see form-wise, class-wise, speed-wise, pace-wise, everything negative. And I've also noted you'll see individually the projected time for a 1.1 miles, and that's based on the pace figures from their last race. Now, he's a horse that I'm pretty down on the Oaklawn horses, but one thing about Tapa Janali is he does keep running, and I have noticed that as the stakes have been raised, they've taken this one further back, and so he'll probably have a little bit more in the tank than perhaps some of the others who are going to be attending the pace. Now, I don't think he's one that can, or she is one that can factor in this race, but if you're looking for value in a horse that maybe can suck up for the bottom of your super or your try, I think Tapa Janali is maybe one that you think about. Jing Jen is one of the Brad Cox's, and he's got a couple in this race. And this one, I just didn't really like that Gazelle as a race on the whole, but I really didn't like what I saw from Jing Jen. It was an improved performance, you can say that, but it was significantly better than the last race, and that does give me pause that maybe a regression is in order with Jing Jen. I didn't like the form, and the horse just seemed outclassed. Did hang on for third, but it was a really mediocre third. It was a non-factor, tiring third, and I just don't think you can like this horse out of the Gazelle, and I didn't like it generally as a race. So you see the numbers -3, -4 class. I think that's probably the most telling one. -10.72 speed. Pace-wise, about a little bit below average, but the total score, I think, is pretty indicative of a horse who just really is just kind of outclassed. May run a little bit better, but I don't think so. This horse looks like one that the Brad Cox magic. He can't, his magic dust doesn't fall on all his horses. We've seen that before too. So, despite the gaudy connections, I'm going to pass on Jing Jen. Where's My Ring it is a horse that certainly it always brings interest when a horse breaks his maiden or her maiden in a stakes race, and this one did in the Gazelle. We had good authority going into that race that Where's My Ring was in good form and would probably run a good race, and did beat what I consider to be a fairly mediocre field. And I just didn't think it was that great a race, really. And a horse who's never won a race winning a graded stakes race, I mean, how good can it be, to be honest? You'd like to think somebody who'd already won a race would have stepped up, but nobody did. Now, form-wise, I'm not going to give any kudos for winning that type of race, and class-wise either, and that's why you get double zeros. Speed-wise, did run a good figure. There's no question about that. But let's also remember that Aqueduct sometimes does produce numbers that are a little hard to trust as far as speed figures go. We've seen it quite a bit in the past, and this year in particular, the Wood Memorial seems a little high on the Brisnet scale. I just can't quite understand where that comes from. And they have a history in the past of being a little high. I just have a feeling that was the peak effort that Where's My Ring has, and I have a feeling a regression is in order. And the numbers that would have been probably positive for form and class end up being zero because you have to take off for a horse who's probably going to regress. Is about average in the pace department. The projected time would be pretty good based on the speed figures if Where's My Ring runs back to that, but I just don't see it. This is a big step up in class, and I think 15-1 isn't a bad price really, but I just don't think this horse is going to measure up given the firepower in this race. So Where's My Ring is a toss for me. Regulatory Risk is your garden variety Chad Brown Clairvitz stables that always seem to show up. After a couple of starts, he throws them right into a stakes race. And this one didn't run a bad race in the Gazelle at all, I didn't think. And it was a marked improvement over other efforts. And that'll happen with Chad Brown. Quite often they'll do that. And, he really seems to know how to get the most out of a horse. We know this. That's no big surprise. But it was such a bigger effort than Regulatory Risk had run before. I just wonder if it was either the quality of the field or this horse was keyed up to get into the Oaks for it. To me, it kind of speaks to a possibility of regression, maybe not a complete bounce, but that's kind of what it looks like to me. However, in looking at this horse's race cycles, the third one tends to be the best, and this would be the third in the cycle. And it looks like, the fractions, particularly pace-wise, were markedly improved over what they had been. So coming in third in the cycle would perhaps be, while not guaranteed, it looks like Regulatory Risk is going to run a pretty good race. And particularly since this one is up near the pace, which I don't think is going to be particularly strong once Fiona's Magic backs up and heads to the barn, which I think is likely to happen. Regulatory Risk could very well hang around. You're going to get a decent price, 20-1. Hopefully it won't get beat down too much because of the connections. But this is one you could sort of consider. I don't think this race is going to be run from behind. I think it is going to be the ones who are up near the pace and on the front end. So if Regulatory Risk is around, it is conceivable that she could back into the bottom of the Try of the Super. I think that's the extent of it. So with the right price, I would use. But if you don't get it, if anything below 20-1, I would toss because I don't think the value is commensurate with the way this one is probably going to run. Thorpedoanna certainly had a hell of a debut in the Fantasy Stakes and just won drawing off and, looked like a complete world beater. But there's a couple of chinks in the armor that I think are important to point out. And Clairvitch Stables does not own Thorpedoanna. That's an error on my part, and I apologize for it. Thorpedoanna, obviously, that's a hell of a good debut. So a +2 for form because she ran a great race and it did what a good horse should do, is beat a mediocre field. However, it was a mediocre field, and that corresponds to the +1 class rating. On the deep dive, looking at Thorpedoanna, now granted, we only have, for the most part, 2-year-old form to consider. But if you look at her races, the ones that she won so convincingly, she had very soft early fractions. She was able to walk on the lead, or up or on the lead early, and then bound home against probably what were not very good fields. The one time the pace was pretty quick, she ended up second, a distant second, in the goldenrod. And I think that's significant. Moreover, she's by Fast Anna. Well, Fast Anna is more of a sprinter, miler type of sire. And this might be a case where pedigree kind of works against Thorpedoanna. If she hasn't run against a whole lot. That fantasy stakes, that field was not very good at all. When you consider it, when you take a look at it, and the two that came out of that race who were running here, I don't think are going to factor at all. Lemon and Muffin and Tapa Janali. So there's bound to be maybe a little more pace than Thorpedoanna can run at on her best game. And that puts me really up. If you have to look and eliminate some of these lower odds horses, I think Thorpedoanna is very logical, particularly when you consider she ran big off the bench. A lot of times there's a regression that can happen afterwards. I'm not necessarily certain that's the case with Thorpedoanna, but I have a feeling with the fractions being a little more significant, we're not going to see the best from her. And, Kenny McPeak, again, so unpredictable. His horses never seem to put two good starts in a row together. And this one kind of reminds me a little bit of Defining Purpose from last year. And the thing about her was, when the fractions up front were slow, Defining Purpose could factor. Anything that got quick, she was nowhere. Brian Hernandez is a great jockey, and he knows Churchill like the back of his hand, and he'll probably figure out the best trip to utilize Thorpedoanna. But I, on the whole, I think she's really up against it when you consider the more prominent players in this race. And at 5-1, I think she's an underlay. So to me, she's a toss. Lemon Muffin is one I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on. It really comes down to this. Dwayne Lucas was on record as saying after the Honeybee win that this horse had been sort of handicapped by running in a lot of sprints. Obviously, this one has two-turn pedigree and finally put into the wheelhouse in the Honeybee, let it all hang out against a mediocre field. And the fact that Lemon Muffin won and Tapa Janali finished second, I think, underscores how poor a field that was. This horse regressed in the fantasy stakes pretty significantly, and that isn't a big surprise. This horse hasn't demonstrated the kind of precocity to tell you that she is going to rebound and run a big effort. I think that we just have to get it out of our head that Dwayne Lucas, just because he trains a horse, can work magic and get this horse to run big. I just don't see it happening, and I don't want to spend much more time on Lemon Muffin. I did not like any of the horses coming out of Oaklawn for the Oaks Preps, so Lemon Muffin is a toss. Same thing with Fiona's Magic. I don't think there's any reason to spend a lot of time with this horse. The devonadale won around one turn. That's the extent of this horse's potential, I think. 2 turns is not what this horse wants. I think demonstrated that in the Gulfstream Oaks. The pedigree doesn't scream it either. And I just think backing up like that, coming out of a race running that poorly, I don't think there's any way you can expect this horse to rebound. Will be a pace factor, will likely be on the lead, but I do not expect to be around for very long. Fiona's Magic, easiest toss in the field. Tarifa is the contender to try to give Godolphin back-to-back Oaks victories. Look at great connections, Brad Cox, Flavian Pratt. This one has a good pattern of one I think that is improving. to a degree. The thing that concerns me a little bit about Tarfa is she does seem a bit one-paced. Now, her fractions are getting better, and that is a sign of a horse that is improving. Visually, I watch her, and I just wonder about that late kick, that late explosiveness to come down the stretch and just blow it open. This is a good horse. There's no doubt about it. Matches up very well in this field. That's my only concern, is really just visually watching this horse. Just looks a little one-paced, and that's not the kind of horse you want. You want this one for the Alabama or the Coaching Club American Oaks this summer, where the more distance, the better. This is a useful horse. I think you can certainly use in all your gimmicks. I do wonder about the top end to take it down. 7-2 may be a bit of an underlay with regards to Tarfa, but is certainly a horse that I think is useful and you should include in all your gimmicks, but I like others better to win it. Everland is one that has no chance in this race. Just isn't fast enough, but will keep running. Then I don't think there's going to be any pretense at all to try to win this race. So this one's going to be back in the clouds, and we'll just keep running and hopefully suck up for third or fourth. You're going to get a really good price. This horse ran a nice race in the Bourbonnette, has demonstrated ability, has a little bit of a good race, bad race pattern that is a concern. But if you think about it in terms of not trying to win the race and just get up for a check, maybe this one keeps running when others are backing up. Abel Cedillo and Eric Foster were a really good combination at Turfway, and this one isn't fast enough, but if you're looking, it's not easy to find prices in this race. But I think Everland is one that you're going to get really monster odds and stands as good a chance as any of the other non-factor horses to get up in the gimmicks. So at a price, why not take a shot and use? Into Champagne is another one. Don't want to spend a lot of time on. This horse will be a pace factor and nothing more. Has demonstrated just can't, visually pretty impressive looking horse. She just doesn't stack up. I mean, she just hasn't been able to hang in there with the better horses. And the Florida races, the Gulfstream Park Oaks was a pretty good race, but it wasn't one. I don't know. It was okay, but in comparison to some of the others, I just think she's outclassed in this spot, and I think she's you look at all those negatives for her score. I think she's a pretty easy toss. We all remember that awesome debut at Saratoga where this horse just won for fun. I mean, Ways and Means is a horse with a ton of ability. The spin away had some excuses, had some trouble in there, and Brightwork got the better of her. That's true. But, this horse came out debuting in a Grade 1 stakes race in the Gulfstream Oaks, had all kinds of trouble, and still was able to craft a second-place finish, and got a career-high Brisnet figure in the process. That's an excellent sign. Chad Brown has this horse ready. He would not debut this horse in a stakes race at 3 if he didn't know what he had. I think this horse is sitting on a big race. I really like Ways and Means as a prime win candidate and is probably my pick to win this race. You see all the numbers stack up pretty well. The pace numbers are a little light, a little bit below average, but also consider that she had all kinds of trouble and was stymied a little bit in the Gulfstream Park Oaks, which would certainly impact the pace rating. So I'm not going to worry about that a whole lot. I think this horse is sitting on a big effort and is a primary win candidate. Power Squeeze, to me, is kind of an X-factor horse. You can kind of go either way with. It's hard to knock a horse who's won 4 straight. Certainly didn't get the best of the best Ways and Means, so it's hard to gauge because Ways and Means had so much trouble. But the fact is this horse keeps winning. And the progression, particularly with the Thorograph, shows a horse that's continually improving and may have another race in her wheelhouse. And I think the numbers all stack up pretty well in this field. I'm just not sure that this one can offer the top end to beat the better horses in here, but is certainly intriguing at 12-1. I think you have to use this horse for sure. And I think we'll probably, if you consider all the best horses are parked to the outside in this race, the post position really isn't that big a deal because they're all out there. So to me, Power Squeeze is, the only horse really who's a major league threat. Would be, in my opinion, Ways and Means to the inside, Just FYI and Lesleys Rose to the outside. I think this one will be able to get to where she wants to, and I'm not concerned that that will compromise her chances terribly much. Really, the question's going to be whether she can raise her game because this would be a class test. She has answered the bell for 4 straight. And at 12-1, you are getting a really good price. I don't think there's any way you can't use this horse. Certainly in the exotics, I'm not sure about a win, but if you are looking for a horse for value in this race, I think you could do a lot worse than Power Squeeze. Well, we all know Just FYI from last year had a steady progression as Belmont horses will do. They just get a little better with every start, and it certainly culminated with the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies. Came out in the Ashland, and I thought ran a pretty good race off the bench. Got swung wide where the inside was a little more favorable. I thought kept on pretty well, and certainly we know Belmont, the second race off the layoff is when you want to get him. So I thought it was very encouraging that Just FYI ran a second. Now, I've heard a little scuttlebutt, and I can't confirm this, but from my own eyes, I should say. But I've heard that Just FYI may be a horse who has not progressed physically from 2 years old, and maybe isn't getting much bigger, hasn't filled out a whole lot. And the works would indicate she's doing just fine, but it's a little thing in the back of my mind that makes me wonder about this horse. Certainly the numbers from the Ashland, which was the best Derby prep, would put this horse in contention. And I think if this horse can advance, second off the layoff is an absolute win candidate without question. You just can't go against Belmont on a big stakes day. But there's that little thing in the back of my mind that, when you hear experienced people who know horseflesh better than I do, and they start talking about whether a horse is filled out or not, it does make you wonder a little bit if perhaps this one is just about plateaued. I don't know that for sure. Something to think about. I think Just FYI is a must-use, certainly a win candidate. The one thing I've always liked about this horse more than anything else is that she likes a fight. And she loves to compete. And I think that's what you need to win a race like the Oaks. So from that perspective, I think Just FYI is one that you certainly could consider a primary win candidate. I think Ways and Means, maybe the top end is a little better. And so I'm kind of leaning that way. But I think Just FYI is certainly a must-use. Lesleys Rose is certainly ran a hell of a good race in the Ashland and really looked awful good. Was able to save quite a bit of ground where Just FYI was wide throughout, and that may have made a little bit of a difference. But there's no doubt this horse ran a really good race. Lesleys Rose did one thing that all the Pletcher 3-year-olds seem to be doing this year, and they just don't fire off the bench first start. You can just go right down the line, and all of them have not fired their best shot first off the layoff, and I suppose that's a good thing. But I got in the back of my mind that devonadale. I just kind of wonder what the hell happened. Why wasn't Lesleys Rose good enough to beat that field? Because I don't think there's any world beaters in that, but certainly made up for it in the next start. And you obviously want that type of progression. But the one thing you can say about it, though, that was an awful big race. And there is the possibility of regression a little bit in the back of my mind about that. This horse certainly fits class-wise, has the talent. There's no doubt about that. I just wonder a little bit about regressing slightly. Off of a really big late race like the Ashland. I've noticed this at Keeneland. A lot of times these horses, the Bluegrass Stakes, the Ashland, they win big and then they don't follow it up with a big race in the Derby of the Oaks. I don't know. It's just something about Keeneland and the next race after racing there. It's just a hunch on my part. That's all. I can't substantiate it with anything else. This horse it is certainly a use. There's no doubt about that. Whether or not she can replicate that last race, I remains to be seen. But certainly on the numbers alone, this horse would be a fit without a doubt. I just wonder about a little bit about regression, and I'll leave that to your discretion. So let's take a look at the also eligibles. The first is Our Pretty Woman, and I really like this horse. I hope the hell she draws in, because I thought that Fairgrounds Oaks was a really big race. This horse has an excellent progression, and I think is sitting on another big race, has made steady improvement. The fractions are getting better. More importantly, the third fraction for a front runner was improving, and that's the mark of a horse who's getting better at the right time. It's just a shame that she won't get into the race. If she does, certainly the 15 hole would be difficult, or would become the 14 or maybe even the 13. But if you consider all the speed or all the better horses are on the outside, this one should be able to hustle up and get position. I'm not worried about that too much, and would be able to dust into Champagne or Fiona's Magic, I think, without difficulty. This one getting on the lead, I think, is extremely dangerous. I just really like the form cycle. I just like the way this horse is moving forward. If this one draws in, I think is a must-use at 15-1. And I think I don't think this race sets up for late runners terribly well. I think it is going to be one on the front end or close to it. And if you consider that with the really good form and the likelihood of running another big one, I think Our Pretty Woman, if she draws in, is a must-use, particularly at 15-1. Candid is a horse that I liked last year, and winning the Alcibiades at Keeneland, I thought demonstrated a lot of ability. I was pretty sure going into the Breeders' Cup Juvenile that she was not going to have a favorable race shape. Santa Anita just doesn't set up well for closers, but she did run a credible third. It is a little unsettling that they waited this long to debut Candid to start the year running in the Ashland. I thought she ran a pretty good race. It just, the track wasn't setting up well for her. And the thing that's still troubling is she doesn't change leads, just doesn't. And it's not a complete recipe for destruction, but, you know, when you change horses change leads, they get that little extra burst, and particularly for a closer, that's imperative because you're behind the eight ball right off the bat. I think if this horse does draw in, certainly would have to use. You're going to get 15-1. That's a hell of a good price on what I think is a very good horse. And Todd Pletcher second off the layoff. I think all the signs indicate this one would run a better race. I just don't think necessarily the race shape sets up terribly well for Candid. So if for some reason she does draw in, I would certainly put underneath, but I don't think it's logical as a win candidate. That should be an S for a closer. Sorry about that instead of EP. My bad. So here are the total scores for form, class, speed, and pace for the entire field. And again, in red are the lesser horses, and then the blue are the leaders. And you see there isn't a lot of diversion in the top four. I mean, they're all pretty stacked, pretty close together, with the exception of Lesleys Rose. And I just wonder if she's going to run back to that Ashland. I just have some concerns about that. And I the other ones in blue, I think, are ready to make a move forward. Of those, I think Just FYI would be one that I would really be high on, as well as Ways and Means. But we do have a little bit of concerns with Just FYI. And again, Ways and Means numbers you have to account for the fact that she did have a lot of trouble in the Gulfstream Parks Oaks, and I certainly think she'll rebound it from that. Of course, always a trip is trip dependent for everybody in a 14-horse field, but those are the total figures for you to take a look at and peruse. And again, I think this is a pretty top-heavy race. Now, one of the things I've done is give you a, we do our usual use and toss, and I did it in the ABC format for those of you who use Ticket Maker for your exotics. I think Ways and Means, if you had to pinpoint one horse that I'm focusing on, I think she's the one who's going to win this race. I think her upside is tremendous. She had a trouble trip last time and still was able to get up for second. It's very logical to expect her to move forward, and I think she showed a world of talent at 2 years old, and I really like Ways and Means in this spot. Just FYI, certainly would be one to consider as a primary win candidate. I do have that little thing. I have heard that maybe she hasn't filled out all the way, can't substantiate it, but when you hear it from more experienced horse people who know flesh better than I do, then I have to take it seriously. Our B's, I think Tarifa and Power Squeeze are probably, or Power Squeeze in particular, is the one that's most intriguing to me. And of course, if Our Pretty Woman draws in, I really like a lot. Lesleys Rose, I'm just not sure is going to follow that Ashland up with another race commensurate with it. It seemed like an awful big race. And Tarifa, I think, is just a little one-paced. That's the only thing that kind of concerns me, but I think will certainly be there within the exotics. The seahorses are all prices, and just trying to find some value within this field, which is not easy to do. I think Everland and Tapa Janali will just keep running. Tapa Janali's one who looks like a horse that is that likes to compete. I just don't think it's good enough. But, in this field with horses backing up, might be able to get up for third or fourth in the exotics. So one to consider at a big price. And that's what the asterisk means. I could go either way with. And Candid, certainly, I don't think the race shape sets up well for, and maybe a bit of an underlay. I don't think 15-1 she'll stay at that after what she did at 2. But if you can get a decent price, she probably is a really good bet to finish out the try of the Super. As far as the tosses go, the one that is fairly intriguing to me is Regulatory Risk. Doesn't come out of a very good race, but is a Chad Brown, and we know that they can vault forward. And maybe, if there's a faltering from one of the other more prominent horses, Regulatory Risk, and particularly if they slow the pace down, Regulatory Risk is one to think about who could hang in there. And again, I'm against thorpedoanna. I just don't see it. I never want a Kenny McPreek at a short price. He's borne that out more often than not. You want him when you least expect it, and I think people are expecting more from thorpedoanna, and I don't think she's coming out of a great race, and I'm just not sure a 1 1/8 is exactly what she wants. So those are the tosses. The AEs, I mean, of course, if they don't get in, they don't get in, but that's the way I see the race shape here, and Ways and Means will be my primary win choice. Now, I've done one other thing I like to do, and I generally do this for the Derby. I draw out by hand where I think the horses are going to land to get a kind of a better idea for the race shape. And so what I've done here is simulate the way I think the race is going to go. And you see, given the fact that all the better horses are out to the outside, that really doesn't worry me a whole lot. I don't think post positions are that big a deal in this race. I really don't. I think the 7, Fiona's Magic, is likely to be up on the lead. That's the only chance she has, and I don't think she has one, but that's the way she likes to run. And so that's pretty much where I think what it's gonna look like coming out of the gate. And you can take that for what you will, and we'll see what happens afterwards. But that's our elements of handicapping, a little more truncated version than for the Derby. I hope you got something out of it, and I hope this does help you with your own wagering strategy, and I wish you the best of luck, of course. We're going to have more coverage with regards to ticket structure for the Derby, so be on the lookout for that. And we're going to, I think what we're going to do is the Derby Oaks Pick 6. So we will have a posting for that. in the very near future. If not, today is Wednesday. If not tonight, it'll be tomorrow. So stay tuned for that as well. And again, thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon. And until then, be well.